Now, O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I found some interesting quotes on stress, something we can all relate to in one form or another. One quote on stress says, "God put me on this earth to accomplish a certain number of things. Right now, I am so far behind, I will never die." I try to take one day at a time, but sometimes several days sneak up on me and attack me all at once. There cannot be a stressful crisis next week. My schedule is already full. Can we relate to any of these quotes on stress? Stress is a big problem in America. According to a 2010 study by the American Psychological Association, their findings suggest that as the U.S. economy continues to struggle, findings from the 2010 stress survey in America paint a picture of an overstressed nation. Feeling the effects of a prolonged financial and other recession-related difficulties, Americans are struggling to balance work and home life and make time to engage in healthy behaviors, with stress not only taking a toll on their physical health, but also affecting their emotional and physical well-being of their families. Work-related stress is cited to be the most common source of stress. Right behind it is family stress, and following that, financial stress, and then stress about world events. Stress has adverse effects on our health. 43% of all adults suffer from adverse health effects from stress. 75 to 90% of all physician office visits are for stress-related ailments and complaints. Stress is linked to the 6 leading causes of death: heart disease, cancer, lung ailments, accidents, cirrhosis of the liver, and suicide. And the Occupational Safety and Health Administration have declared stress a hazard of the workplace. The busy, frantic pace of life, coupled with the worries and concerns about work and family and health and finances and the future, can lead anyone to feel stressed out from time to time. We often hear of people being overwhelmed or fatigued or even burned out. We need to unplug from this frantic pace of our lifestyle and the worries that go with it. We can't listen to God if we are surrounded by the noise and stress of our culture. We can't make room for God if it is too crowded by many other things. Spiritual growth requires times of separation from the activity of everyday life. And that's why the disciplines of silence and solitude are so important to the spiritual life and actually to our lives as a whole. The great Christian writer Dallas Willard defines these spiritual practices. He says, "In solitude, we purposefully abstain from interaction with other human beings. In solitude, we intentionally withdraw from the hectic pace of the world, and we spend time alone with ourselves and with God." And silence goes along with solitude. They complement each other. In silence, we unplug from the noise of our culture around us, from all that clamors for our attention. Willard says, in silence, we close off our souls from sounds, whether those sounds be music or noise or words. In silence, we abstain for a time from the man-made sounds of the world around us, from the TV, the radio, the internet, cell phones, crowds, social media. In silence, we refrain from speaking. In the absence of speaking, we are free to listen. Listen to our bodies, to our minds, to our souls, and of course to God. In solitude and silence, we choose to free ourselves for a short time from the noise and busyness of the culture all around us. This provides us with needed rest and refreshment, but also stills our minds and our bodies so that we can be more open and receptive to God and God's Spirit. Psalm 46 describes the need of the Lord's followers to be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. nations. I will be exalted in the earth. In the absence of noise and the pace of our culture, we can focus our minds and remember that God, our God, is the Lord, and that He is in control of everything going on around us, even when everything seems like chaos. Jesus models this practice of silence and solitude. Jesus certainly had a very busy, demanding schedule with many people making demands on his time. Jesus practiced times of being away, separating himself. Describes many occasions when he withdrew to be by himself in prayer. Before his public ministry began, Jesus spent 40 days alone in the desert, in Matthew 4, 1 through 11. Before he chose his disciples, he spent the night alone in the desert hills, Luke 6:12. When he received news of John the Baptist's death, he withdrew to a place by himself, Matthew 14:13. After feeding the 5,000, Jesus went up into the hills by himself, Matthew 14:23. And before his crucifixion, Jesus spent time in solitude in the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew 26:36 through 48. This passage from Mark also describes a time in which Jesus withdrew into solitude. Prior to this, Jesus had had a very busy day of ministry. He healed Simon's mother-in-law from a fever, and then ministered to the great crowds of people who brought many sick people and demon-possessed people to him to be healed. That morning, early in the morning, Jesus got up and left the other disciples and went to a solitary place to pray. When Simon came looking for him, saying, "Everyone is looking for you," Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." Jesus' solitude allowed him the time and space to listen to his Father's plans for ministry. His solitude gave him the strength and discernment to not go along with the crowd's demands, but to stay within God's unique plans for him, his ministry. Silence and solitude will help us to have the time and space and the quiet to discern God's will for our lives. We can be tempted by the pressures of others to do things that are not in keeping with God's will for us. We can develop the strength to say no to these things, even good things, that may not be God's will for us to do. Silence and solitude help break our desire to please other people and value their opinions too highly. These disciplines will help us to develop a confidence in our identity as a child of God. When we are confident in ourselves as God's children, we won't be held hostage by the opinions and expectations of others. Silence and solitude help us to learn to be alone without being lonely. We learn to be sustained by God's presence. Conversely, silence and solitude help us to learn to be with people in a more loving, constructive way. These disciplines burn away the dross of our selfishness, our anger, our jealousy, our pride, our resentment, our fear, our anxiety, all these things that often get in the way of our relationships with one another. Silence and solitude make us better at being alone, but also being in fellowship with one another. Theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his classic work, Life Together, says, "Let him who cannot be alone beware of community, and let him who is not in community beware of being alone." Spiritual writer Henry Nouwen, in The Way of the Heart, says, "In a world that victimizes us by its compulsions, we are called to solitude where we can struggle against our anger and greed and let our new self be born in the loving encounter with Jesus Christ. It is in this solitude that we become compassionate people, deeply aware of our solidarity in brokenness with all of humanity, and are ready to reach out to anyone in need." So how do we practice these disciplines of silence and solitude? Silence and solitude can be very threatening to us. Part of the practice is getting over the fear of just being alone in silence and simply jumping in and trying it. Traditionally, people often give up something for Lent. That's a common practice, giving up chocolate or sweets or social media or something along those lines. And these can be very useful practices. The self-denial can encourage us to better focus on God. I've decided to do something a little different this year, however, and instead of giving up something for Lent, I've decided to add the practice of silence and solitude to my Lenten discipline this year. I'm committing to a practice of 10 minutes of silence per day, where I'm still and focusing upon my breathing and focusing upon God. Do you want to practice the discipline of silence and solitude? Maybe you would, but you don't quite know how to get started. Well, start small. Look for natural places to be in silence and solitude, like a park or a garden or your backyard, the office or the car, anywhere where you can be alone for just a few minutes. Start with just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes or even fewer. This might be uncomfortable at first. We're not used to silence and solitude. It goes against our nature and our culture, and that's fine. Don't be hard on yourselves. Be comfortable with the discomfort. Turn off the TV, the computer, the cell phone. This is an act of faith. You're trusting that the world can function without you for a few moments. Relax and be silent, be still. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." And don't worry if your head seems noisy. Our heads are constantly filled with a cacophony of noise and thoughts that run wild. It takes time to quiet the thoughts, and with practice you'll experience more calmness. One suggestion when you have these racing thoughts is to focus upon your breath. The natural cadence of breathing in and out. That helps one to focus. Did you know that in the Bible the word for spirit comes from the same word as breath? So as you are focusing upon your breathing, you can focus on uniting your spirit with the Spirit of God. Remember that with all spiritual practices, it is a practice. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for progress. Be patient with yourselves and trust the results to God. Is 5 minutes too long? Start with just 60 seconds. So I would like us to experience, in a small way, this practice of silence and solitude. And I'm taking a bit of a risk here, but I would like us to spend 60 seconds in silence, and brief just 1 minute in silence, and see what that feels like. For some of you, that won't be nearly enough time. And for some of you, that will seem like an eternity. When will it be over? But the only way to get started practicing silence and solitude is to do it. So I'd like us to just try for 60 seconds. So everybody kind of sit up in your pew, put your feet on the floor, and just kind of focus on your breathing. Take those big, deep belly breaths. Close your eyes if that's better. And let's just try for 60 seconds of silence, starting now. Now we'll come out of our silence. How was it? Not too bad? So this is something we can practice in our everyday lives, even if we can just take 60 seconds